Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome wherever you are in the world, and welcome to episode 24 of the ESG Show. And today we are talking about investing in ESG. And I've been looking forward to this episode because I think it's possible you might have a slight difference in opinion between some of the guests. Although, oddly enough, when we drill down, we might find that they have more in common than they don't. And where the ESG Show differs from a lot of events of this nature is we like difference of opinion, but we also like constructive, polite debate, which is our mantra, really. Anyway, so enjoy the show. Before we get started, I want to tell you about a survey that we did, and this survey we asked the question: do you think investors should be focusing on investing in companies with a good ESG rating? And we had 49 people reply. 73% said yes. 40% said not until streamlined standards. 6% said no. And 6% had another reason. And we had a lot of comments. This week. Alan Langston said, I don't believe that currently there is sufficient knowledge, understanding, validation, or confidence in ESG for an investor to just rely on a score without further due diligence. That said, I do believe that investors will have more confidence in sustainability and performance of companies that have a documented ESG journey. And Anit Srivastava responded to Alan's comment, and he said, I agree with your first point on sustainability and performance of companies. That may take time to understand the impact. Investors also need some metrics now to make their decisions on future investments. And we had a big question from Martin Viover, and he said, I click no. Investors should use their brains instead. All ESG ratings apply a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to the expected management approach. All ESG ratings evaluate performance differently, mostly independently of context. None of them includes proper scopes for all material ESG aspects. Regulation in the EU made ESG a compliance exercise, leading to compliance. Most of the low performance in our assessment reported, since they had to, leading to a double loss. The top performance reported out 10 years ago, creating double dividends. And Daryl Claret said, an important point is how accurate is the accuracy of ESG ratings. A lot of ratings are fundamentally flawed due to conflicts of interest, and ESG is immature. And he cited an article in Forbes. And I quite like this article, actually, looking at FTX, the Sam Bankman-Fried business. ESG ratings company True Value Labs even gave FTX a higher score on leadership and governance than ExxonMobil. No, the crypto exchange had only 3 directors on its board. ESG has perverted beyond recognition. It's done countless failure of corporate controls and such a complete absence of trustworthy financial information as occurred here, said John Ray, newly appointed CEO of FTX in its bankruptcy. And finally, we have one other comment from Catherine Burlington. And she said, I think investors should be focusing on sustainable businesses, but not this specific rating. Support of sustainable businesses has been happening. So why codify and police the process? Why create the barrier or burden? Businesses and investors have been naturally taking the path of sustainability for some time. It shows up different ways in different companies. Investors and consumers can easily find out about a company and be informed. Industry and consumer groups create their own certifications, like ESG, and tell their own stories. Fakers are found out. ESG ratings might not reflect reality. Inauthentic reports or excluding some great companies from the sustainability table could empower the wrong companies and disempower strong, authentic ones. Another concern about ESG ratings is political control over the very profitable green industry, which has already reached mass adoption and does not need government intervention. Government buy-ins, yes. Government or controlling intervention, no. Big dollars is making a killing in the sustainability market. That could be good or it could be bad. Investors, beware. So those are some interesting points, and I thought we could return to those points a little later and discuss them with our guests. Anyway, let's meet the guests this morning. Oh, I should say, by the way, I forgot to mention it earlier, we're producing this edition of the ESG show in conjunction with the Aspirational Leaders Network. And I'll be telling you a little bit more about that shortly. Anyway, now it is time to meet our guests. And on the show today, we have Bill Davis.
Hey, Michael.
Hello, Bill. How are you today? And whereabouts in the world are you speaking?
I'm in cold Boston, Massachusetts.
In Boston, Massachusetts. Okay, good. So Bill is the founder of and portfolio manager at Stance Capital. Prior to forming Stance Capital, he was co-founder and MD of Capital Empirical Asset Management and portfolio manager of EAM Sustainable Equity, a strategy he launched in 2014. He's also a board member of Ceres. He taught at Columbia University Center for Environmental Research and Conversation and has guest lectured at Harvard College, Harvard Business School, MIT, and Vanderbilt and Boston University. So, Bill, Capital Stance says on its website, I think, its strategic focus lies in identifying companies excelling in sustainability and ethical governance. Can you expand on what that means?
Sure. I mean, I guess what I would say is that we are purpose-built around trying to prove the point that if you build portfolios a certain way, that values alignment and risk mitigation that comes from additional risk factors that as ESG managers we have available to us is essentially a free option. That's really kind of, that's our reason for being as a firm.
Okay, and how's that working out for you?
It's actually working out pretty well. I mean, notwithstanding this year, which has been a particularly tough year for us, not for ESG related reasons, but rather because of sort of the mega cap trade that's been going on. We're coming up on a 10-year track record in our flagship product at the end of this quarter, and we expect to perform in line with our benchmark, which is the S&P 500, and we will do so with substantially less risk and volatility, essentially while being fully invested at all times.
Okay, so you're keeping pace with the S&P 500, but you're doing so with less risk.
Correct.
Volatility. Okay, thank you for that, Bill. Well, speak to you again in a minute. Also on the show today, we have Mark Newman. Hello, Mark. How are you?
Hey,
and where are you,
hey, Michael.
where are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
Yeah, I'm brilliant, thank you. And whereabouts in the world are you today?
I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and it is surprisingly equally cold, nearly freezing, which is rare for November in Atlanta, Georgia.
I have to say, it's a really lovely sunny day here in England today, but I don't suppose that's going to last much longer. So Mark is the CIO of Constrained Capital and creator of the ESG Orphans Index. It's 30 years Wall Street veteran. He has 30 years Wall Street veteran experience. He's a former hedge fund partner, derivatives trader with Merrill Lynch and Susquehanna.
Yep.
CFA charter holder, and he always seeking investment opportunities, especially around capital constraints. So, Mark, what's an ESG Orphans Index?
Right. So the ESG orphans are the exclusions of the ESG bubble of the past decade. And the idea really birthed, and Constrained Capital is the name of my firm. A hedge fund gentleman called Cliff Asness spoke of constraints on capital in investing, leading to misallocation of capital and general malinvestment. And to me, the ESG bubble of the past decade or more was probably the biggest one we've seen in the past decade. And the names left out of that bubble, excluded, the virtue side of the exclusions: fossil fuel, nuclear energy, and weapons, and the old sin stocks, alcohol, tobacco, gambling. Those are the ESG exclusions. I call them the orphans. And to me, that's an opportunity because they suffered from lack of investment, lack of flows, where others in the ESG bubble, we could get into it, but they had suffered from malinvestment, of overinvestment, let's call it. So the orphans are the exclusions of the ESG bubble, poised to be high expected return securities over time.
Okay, so ESG is like the South Seas bubble, is it, or the Dutch tulips thing?
Well, that's the cyclicality of Wall Street and finance in general, is running with a great idea that sounds good. Whether or not it ends up being good is sort of to be seen. And my opinion is similar, yes, to that stance, that idea, Bill. Yeah, sorry, Michael. That idea that every bubble must come to an end. And I think, look, interest rates over the years have fueled these kinds of bubbles, and now we're in a new interest rate paradigm. So yes, I think that the ESG bubble is due for a retrenchment, let's say.
I certainly think there have been a lot of bubbles over the last 10 years or so. I don't think I'd argue with you on that point. But as I understand it, you do actually, you believe in climate change. You're a fan of sustainability and environmental causes.
So I believe that corporations need to be great stewards for the environment, and so society and governance is part of that too. And I think individuals need to do their part, whether it's less consumption or wary of their use of plastics, and you can go on down the line, and demanding good governance in funds and behaviors of corporations, all of those things. But I'm trying to separate the sounding good idea of ESG versus the actual doing good of ESG. And, some of these corporations want to say good things to accomplish ESG scoreboard stuff or accomplish better ratings to get better deals down in the future. And whether or not they're actually implementing these practices and whether it's measurable results that are quantifiable is a bit less probable and less prevalent, in my opinion. That's my view. Again, I love the environment. I'm an outdoorsman. I believe in diverse opinions to get to good decisions, but saying good versus doing good, sort of where the rubber meets the road in ESG, is a very important topic that we need to discuss. And I think that's part of the show here. So I'm looking forward to a further discussion.
All right, that's great. Thank you very much, Mark. And we'll see you again shortly. Also on the show today, we have Shandini Jane. How are you today, Shandini? And where are you ringing from today?
Hi, Michael. Thanks for having me. I'm in New York. I live in London, but I'm in New York today.
Right. Okay. And so Shandini is the founder and CEO of Aquan. Have I said that correctly?
Aquan. Yeah.
Aquan. Very good. Which transforms the way organizations extract meaning and insight from noise. They leverage machine learning and natural language processing to collect unstructured data and give it structure, so they can generate clean, curated, and impactful insights significantly faster. And the company was lauded as the hottest fintech startup in Europe by the Europus Awards. So congratulations on that, Shandini. That's no mere achievement. So can you explain how the company's technology relates to ESG?
Yeah, we do exactly what you described. We help our end customers, all of who are in financial services, identify that relevant bit of insight, that meaningful bit of information that helps them make better decisions. And now within that, obviously, could apply to lots of things, but specifically if we talk about ESG, that applies to being able to identify as accurately as possible what is the sustainability profile of this company. Is this company good for the society? Does this company create a positive impact on the country that it operates in? And at the same time, what are the potential risks, issues that exist with this company? Now, you could sort of hand wave at it and purchase an ESG score and say, okay, this company is highly rated, like, the example that you just gave with FTX, must be good, must be bad. But if you want to do the actual hard work of understanding the company and understanding, is this company actually sustainable? Does this company have good governance? Does this company have good social metrics? Is this company good for the environment? You actually have to get your hands dirty, get into the data, not just that the company is reporting, but you also have to look at third-party data. What is written about this company outside? Does this company actually have any fines that they're not disclosing? Does this company have any lawsuits against it? And does this company, how does this company's worker health and safety metrics look like? All of that is hard work. It requires looking through lots and lots of data, and that can become quite time consuming, quite cumbersome. So at Oak One, we automatically collect all of that data. We run it through language processing. We run it through AI with the intention of helping identify those final bits of material insights for our end users, so they spend all of their time on making decisions, on taking actions, and not time on just collecting and understanding data.
Okay, thank you for that, Shandini. We'll speak to you again shortly. And also on the show today, we have Dora Lutz. Hello, Dora.
Hey, good morning.
How are you? How are you?
Right.
And where in the world are you today?
I am also in Indianapolis, where it is also cold. So cold everywhere, I think.
Okay, so we've got a big US emphasis this week. I'm the odd one out, being the only one from the other side of the pond, as it were. So Dora is the founder of the Aspirational Leaders Network, an online community designed for and by corporate sustainability and ESG leaders to help you meet your organizational goals quickly and meaningfully. The community includes opportunities to find and share best practices, engaging in practical peer discussions, a monthly library of ESG insights curated by experts. So Dora, tell us a little bit more about the Aspirational Leaders Network.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. I'd love to. I think it's really interesting having heard the conversation so far this morning, where we're talking about how do we actually do good and not just sound like we're doing good. And so that's where I think the Aspirational Network has the opportunity to really be a meaningful resource. Because what we see are the people leading these sustainability efforts or these ESG efforts, that's a big job. You have to lead up to the C-suite and educate people on what's happening in this space. You have to embed the work across the organization. You have to vet the resources that are going to help you accomplish this work. You have to be able to report on it, and you're supposed to keep track of everything that's changing on a daily basis. And so this network is designed to make it easier for the people who are doing the work to ask for insights, find the information they need, get the vetted resources, and really just help move all of us forward more quickly and more easily.
Okay, we've got a slight animation here, which we're going to run, which is appearing now. I don't know if you can talk us through this a little bit, or...
Yeah, really. So one of the things that I'm excited about this is that there are feeds. There's a way for somebody to come in and do a search. Hey, I need to know something about heat pumps. What's out there? What are the resources? How do I find people who have this specific expertise or knowledge? What happened in the last month that I need to know about? Where is there information I can share with others in my organization? And how do I search for the resources that I need to do my work well?
Okay, thank you for that, Dora. That sounds great. Now, we do include a link in the comments section. There is going to be a link to the Aspirational Leaders Network. So do click on that link to find out more.
Come join us.
Now we're at that point in the show when we talk about recent editorial coverage. And we've chosen a couple of articles which I will tell you about as soon as my computer enables me to move on. There was an article in, just bear with me and I'll tell you about the article. There was an article in US News, what the SEC names rule means for ESG funds and greenwashing. And Dora, I think you took a look at this article. What's all this about then?
Yeah, well, I think this is a really great lead-in for the conversation that we're going to have today and the things that we've already started to hear. That the SEC is basically saying not all ESG funds are created the same. You can't just throw ESG in a name and assume that it's going to actually align with this one-size-fits-all framework. And so I'm excited to see, there's a lot that remains to be known about how this will come to life. But I think it's a great start just to acknowledge that we need to have more definitions about this work.
Okay, thank you for that, Dora. Shandini, Bill, and Mark, if you want to chip in with any conversations, just let yourselves know, and we'll hand over to you. Just speak, and you will appear. Also, Shandini, I think you spotted an article on CNN. ESG has lost its meaning. One advocate says, "Let's throw it in the trash." So, any thoughts about this, Shandini? What's all this about?
Yeah, it's a very sensational headline, isn't it? But if you actually read what the article is saying, they're not actually against principles of responsible investing or principles of investing based on sustainability. They're actually talking about that acronym ESG. If you look down, they actually say that climate change does pose an existential threat to all of us, and it makes sense to identify businesses that are doing good for the environment and to penalize businesses that are not engaging in sustainable business practices. But they're specifically talking about that term ESG, and that has become quite toxic. That's the challenge with acronyms in general. You can take with it, and it can mean so many different things to so many different people. So I think that article itself is not so much about the principles of ESG, but about the implementation of how we are doing that responsible investing or sustainable investing. It's also criticism of using scores to do it. I think we'll come back to that idea of scores again and again. But that's really what they're focusing in the article. We need a complete rebranding, not just of the name, but of the way we evaluate companies, of the way we analyze if companies are good or bad.
Okay, thank you for that. I think that this is a common theme, that people accept the idea of climate change, of course, and responsible business, responsible investing. They're just not quite sure ESG is the tool to do it. And I think the acronym has become a little bit unpopular in some quarters. It's very popular in some quarters of your country, of course, in a kind of bottom right-hand corner, if my geography is serving me correctly. I think ESG is very unpopular indeed. So Mark believes that ESG can lead to a misalignment of capital. Bill, Shandini, Dora, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I don't agree with that at all. I mean, I think that Mark, you mentioned earlier that you think it's a bubble and it's being fueled by low interest rates. The reality is the ESG movement has been going on for a couple of hundred years. It started as faith-based investing. And so I think for a very long time, people have sought to align capital with values. Now, maybe it was less as a result of the desire to mitigate potential risk in portfolios. And I think that in the more recent version of it, I think that it is very much alignment of capital with potential material risk factors that the ESG movement is about. And by the way, that applies not only to the investment firms, to the portfolio managers and the investors seeking those portfolios, but I think it also applies to businesses as a whole that are looking to mitigate risk.
Okay, thank you for that, Bill.
Michael, let me just for a second. Bill is right that SRI, socially responsible investing, back in the 17 and 1800s, this has been around for sure, appealing to certain religious groups, can't smoke, can't drink, these kinds of things, right? And these stocks become a scarlet letter, right? To own those stocks, you have to be willing to get figurative stuff thrown at you. You can't own that tobacco stock. You can't own that. My point in the interest rate environment is we had a 40-year cycle of rates going down, which lowered the cost of risk, essentially, so that in the last decade, this has accelerated towards zero interest rates, which has meant any bits of risk that you want to take became sort of costless. If it was 7% interest rates, that's a 7% a year tax on your new investment. At 0%, there's no risk. So we talk about bubbles. We could say SPACs, NFTs, cryptocurrencies, and ESG. These have all exploded over the past decade. So when I said that the acceleration has been seen in these bubbles, it has been fueled by the low interest rate environment. Now, when we talk about ESG, as we discussed just before here, the shiny object is a classic Wall Street, hey, here's the next best thing. We've solved everything. There's no risk. ESG is going to make the world better for everybody. That's all qualitative. Very little quantitative analysis goes into that other than the E, measuring inputs and outputs. The S and the G are opinions. And there's no real measurement universally of what's good. We can all agree on maybe that we don't like soda pop, or we do, or we like protein, or we don't, or whatever it might be, but there's no universal measure. And I think what Wall Street has done has taken a good idea, ESG, we should be great stewards, and we should, and turned it into this shiny object of, hey, I have the panacea. Everyone throw your money in. You're going to be ESG. And the components of the best rated ESGs, Amazon, etc., they are not ESG companies. Okay, from carbon inputs, use of slave labor in some cases in the world. I don't want to point any fingers. Governance is absolutely abominable in a lot of these companies, and now we've sort of lopped it into, hey, ESG. And I think Shandini said it earlier. You really have to dig into every single company and know specifically what is their ESG movement. Not, oh, they're lopped into the ESG AAAs, they're good. And I think, Bill, you do a great job of finding the specific companies, and that's important, and that's the challenge. But I think we use ESG as this, hey, everyone, we're saving the world in ESG. And that's just a false narrative that too many investors have been brought into, in my opinion.
Can I ask you a question? Sorry, Michael, I know we need to run on.
No, I was going to come to you anyway, so that's fine. Go ahead.
And I think for the purposes of going forward as well, it would be good to distinguish between the two. There is one, what are we calling ESG? Are we saying ESG is identifying companies that have been rated highly by some score provider, not sure which score provider, some score provider, and that is good ESG? Or are we saying ESG is companies that are actually doing good business? Because the first one, I think we probably all agree that is flawed. The second one, we could argue that is just another lens at which you look at risk. I mean, even if before we had ESG, nobody ever said I want to invest in a badly managed business, right? We all did the governance checks to make sure the company is actually well managed. Now we do know climate change is becoming an issue, and even if you could be a climate change believer, a climate change denier, but you definitely do not want to invest in a company that is in an area which is highly prone to flooding or droughts, because that will just cause disruption of business. So that sort of analysis of identifying, are companies good for the environment? What is the company's impact on the environment next to it, around it, and how does the environment around the company affect the company? If companies don't pay minimum wage, they are going to face lawsuits. If companies have modern slavery, they are going to be anti-regulation. They are going to face regulatory actions, right? So it's irrespective of if we believe in ESG or not, this does have a financial impact on companies. So I just wanted to sort of ask you the question on, when you say ESG orphans, is it companies that are good or bad rated by some rating agency using some mechanism, or is it actually aligning, looking at companies that are poorly or badly managed on some of these risk axes?
So that's a great question, and I thank you. The original idea behind the orphans was the arbitrarily excluded companies by the ESG movement. So I have the old sin stocks, alcohol, tobacco, gambling. Just again, I'm not saying they're good or bad stewards. In fact, ironically, Philip Morris and Altria are well-governed companies. Their product's bad. I'm sorry, that you're right. I don't smoke. It's a terrible product. But as an investment and a high expected return security, because it's been excluded from this massive bubble and everything over here left out is shrunk. And then on the other side is the virtue, the woke world, fossil fuel, nuclear energy, and weapons. And so when I look at my basket of ESG orphans, it's quantitatively excluded high expected return securities over time. And we can debate on the climate changing. The only thing constant in the world is the climate constantly changing. And what's driving that? Well, there's a lot of scientists out there with mixed views, and there's some paid for scientists with strong views. I don't want to get into all that. But when I determined this basket, it was based on high expected return securities that have lost out on flows because bigger parties, whether it's a BlackRock or a Vanguard, funneling money towards our best ESG names. And I think some of the questions that began this show were all about the rating agencies and the nebulous nature and the potentially compromised. Look, it's like the CDOs and the global financial crisis. Fitch, Moody's, S&P. They rated AAA junk. They rated junk as AAA, and the world blew up. So if we look at from the rating agencies calling these stocks the best ESG, that's a panacea blanket solution. As opposed to, like I said, Bill does this individual stock assessment and can identify ESG factors within his stock picking. That's the hard work, and that's how it's done. The lazy man's work is, oh, I have a new ESG ETF, and I have a greenwash ETF with net zero pathways, Paris aligned words in it, when they all own the same stocks. Amazon, terrible global carbon footprint. Apple, Foxconn, we could go on the list. So when names get included in the ESG umbrella, that's someone's opinion, not quantifiable mostly. That becomes an ESG catch-all. Hey, throw your money in ESG. I'd rather give it to Bill doing individual work in single companies and saying, these are good stewards. That's the difference. And that's the way I see it. Doing good versus saying good to achieve an ESG rating. That's the way I view that, Chandini.
Okay. So, look, Mark, I want to push on. I'm going to be speaking to you all individually shortly, and you'll have the opportunity to have your say. I just wanted to give Dora an opportunity to say anything at this point. If you have anything to chip in, Dora?
I always have stuff to say, but I think I want to listen because this is such a rich opportunity for us to hear the dialogue. So thanks, Michael. Okay,
that's fine. Well, in that case, we're only 8 minutes behind schedule, so that's pretty good by the standards of the ESG show. I'm going to have a brief chat with Bill. Then Dora's going to be talking to Mark, and then I'm going to be talking to Chandini. So, Bill. So this is me and Bill for a few minutes. And Bill, I wanted to ask you about this faith-based investing, which is quite similar to ESG. Why are people offended by ESG, but not necessarily offended by faith-based investing, I wonder?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, because if you actually look at faith-based investing, and by the way, I don't care what faith, it can be Sharia, it can be Catholic values, it can be Jewish values, it could be anything. Basically, the underpinnings of every one of those investment policies is ESG, or what we might consider sort of kind of mainstream ESG. And so, yeah, why is there no feigned moral outrage over faith-based investing? And I've thought about this quite a bit, and I've kind of come to the conclusion that there is a new dynamic at play. And when I say new, maybe over the last 10, 15, 20 years, and that is that businesses have gotten involved in this. This is now, and when I say businesses, I mean thousands of them. I mean businesses representing hundreds and hundreds of billions of employees who are not acting out of some sort of woke conspiracy, but rather, I think, based on their own self-determination, have realized that the nature of capitalism is changing, and that they are acting out of enlightened self-interest, recognizing that there is a business case for sustainability, and that ultimately it's good for their shareholders, it's good for the communities they operate in, it will attract the best and retain the best employees and customers. I want to read a quick quote from, and I'm actually going to read this because I want to make sure I get it right. This is from James Quincy, who's the CEO of Coca-Cola. And he was speaking at the World Economic Forum, I think last year. And he said, if ESG becomes toxic as a phrase, it doesn't matter to me. I'm just going to stop saying ESG. But the idea from my basic product, I want to be water positive, I want to be circular packaging, and I want to grow my business with less sugar. You can call it what you want, but nobody with common sense would argue that that's a bad idea. And that to me is the difference recently, is that everybody other than, the oil and gas industry and their proxies, in largely in the U.S. political sphere, nobody would disagree that that's a bad idea. That's all ESG investing is. It's managing risk.
Okay, well, so maybe we should change the name of the ESG show to the acronym that must not be named show.
Not a bad idea.
All right. Okay. Is ESG more about values alignment or risk management, do you think?
I think it's much more about risk management. I mean, I think Mark is saying that basically there's a bunch of scientists that don't agree in climate change. I mean, it is science-based climate risk. Yes, you can always find people that are paid to say things, but there is overwhelming consensus that there are risks here. These risks affect everyone, everywhere, including their investment portfolios. So to me, it's actually, I would say, fiduciary malpractice to not take advantage of a fuller view of risk. And that's really all ESG. Like, I agree with everything everyone said about all the participants on the show today said about, the quality of ratings and relying on ratings. I totally agree with all of that. But the reality is that at its core, ESG is data. It's imperfect, but it gets better every day. And we need to take advantage of it now because we don't have time not to. Swiss Re, I think, said recently by 2050, 18% of GDP is going to be at peril because of climate risk. Just to understand that 18% of global GDP is equivalent to the entire US GDP in the year 2021. And in a recent SocGen report, actually, and so that was more about the environmental side, the E side of these risks. On the S and the G side, SocGen said recently that when a company experiences, this is a 2020 report, when a company experiences what's known as sort of a high controversy event, 2/3 of the time that company's stock price declines 12% for the next 2 years. So think Enron, think, sexual harassment at Google, think Wells Fargo, VW, you name your company, Facebook. Those were not E related, those were S and G related. So this is absolutely about risk management.
All right, okay. And finally, as a portfolio manager in the ESG space, how do you look at the anti-ESG space?
I think it's very simple. I think Mark's proving this point. I think it's just ESG by a different set of values. I would say that anti-ESG is just another lens of value-aligned investing. I think that and I'm all for it. Like, I'm all for free market. I think that PMs should build whatever product they think there's a market for, and if there's a market for it and they do well, then everybody's happy. I do think, though, that I don't hear anybody talking about risk when they're talking about anti-ESG portfolios. They really tend to be just sort of thematic portfolios. And I would imagine Mark's is going to do well because it's basically high-yielding, sort of low-growth industries that pay decent yields, and historically they've done very well, and there's maybe people that want that. However, I think that those products ought to come with a risk warning, which is to say that they are completely ignoring agreed upon fiduciary risks, and people need to know, I think, what they're buying. Otherwise, they could be in for a very volatile experience.
Okay, well, I hope you take note of those points, Mark, and we'll give you an opportunity to respond to them a bit later. I was going to say to you, it seems to me that if William Shakespeare was alive today, he would say that which we call ESG by any other name would smell so sweet, I'm guessing. But anyhow, I'm going to take a back seat now, and Dora is going to be chatting to Mark for a few minutes. Maybe Mark will have an opportunity to answer some of those points that Bill just made. I'm going to hand over to you. The bad news, guys, you've only got about 5 minutes, but anyhow, enjoy your 5 minutes of fame.
I got my running shoes on.
All right, excellent. And you and I already had an hour. I wish everybody could listen to that full hour of discussion that we had, Mark. So let's start with this question around anti-ESG, ESG by any other name. Are you anti-ESG? How do you think about that?
So no, I'm not anti-ESG in my daily life and in the way I approach the world. And as you and I discussed a bit off camera previously, corporate citizenry, individual societal impact, and how we behave is super important. My kids know if they bring home a plastic bottle, whether it's a water bottle or a bottle of pop, which we don't really have in my house, there's going to be a discussion. And I'm going to say, were you dying of thirst? You have a plastic bottle here. So they've learned we have swells and flasks, hydro flasks and those kinds of things. I'm an outdoorsman. I love to ski. I love to scuba dive. I hike in the mountains a lot. I grow my own herbs and vegetables. So I'm very much about protecting the environment, being sustainable, being regenerative, and not over consuming. But when it comes to the investing posture and the opportunity set of where good risk reward is, and I think folks maybe just heard Bill talking about risk management, and that's exactly what it is. And so the companies that have been excluded, they're not bad ESG companies. They're just excluded from the rating systems and the grading scores that these, ISS and Sustainalytics and S&P and MSCI have rated all these companies quite varied along the spectrum from E, S, and G. For any one company can vary, so that there's really, a lot of uncertainty. And that's the worst thing for an investor is uncertainty. And if you can dig in and start maybe like I do sort of quantitatively and figure out quality, cash flows, dividends, cheapness on a relative basis. And the other one is under-owned. That's a huge factor. And so when we talk about the proliferation of ESG and everybody piling into every ESG fund, launch of a new ESG fund, a lot of them own the same stocks, becomes very crowded. And the Magnificent Seven is the aftermath of the last 6-7 years of ESG funds buying Apple and Google and Amazon, just as part of the S&P matching the weighting, and they've expanded. And the orphans on the anti-ESG side, if we're calling it that, they all shrunk. Nobody wanted to own these. They've been cast aside in the corner like an orphan. And so to me, from a risk reward perspective, nobody owns those. They're cheap valuation wise versus the rest of the S&P. Pay good dividends, low beta, have a defensive nature to them, and they're under-owned. So if these anti-ESG, as people are calling them, become better stewards, hey, let me improve my ESG standing, they're going to become accepted in the ESG universe, and people will migrate and the flows will help. So I am not anti-ESG in the way I live or the way I believe companies should behave. I'm anti-ESG in the moniker that Wall Street has assigned, and how Wall Street has really muddied the waters into this sort of panacea. Hey, this is an ESG fund. You should buy this because you want to be ESG, but you're not really affecting your ESG perspective, your ESG view on your portfolio. And that's really the difference.
And I think that's apparent to me in the fact that you're even willing to come onto the show, right? And share your thoughts and how people can be thinking about this from the investor standpoint. So knowing that a lot of the people in this audience are pro ESG and have a vested interest in seeing businesses advance this work, what should, think about for me, what should I be thinking about over the next, 3 to 5 years? Where do you think the space is going to go? What should I be doing to make sure that I'm prepared to meet investors on whichever side of the coin they come down on?
So I think ESG is going to further evolve, and it's not going to be a binary thing. It's going to be sort of this 3-dimensional moving in various directions. I think they're going to lose the term ESG. I think that E will still be a focus. S and G are much more qualitative, sort of arbitrary, in my opinion, and it's going to move towards impact or sustainability. Those are sort of words, that you can't really, it's like apple pie and mom, right? You can't really argue those. But I would say, I would say that the individual really needs to take a little bit more ownership of their concepts of ESG. What's most important to you? There's no universal measure of goodness. If you say carbon footprint is my most important item in ESG, you can't own Amazon. You just can't. I'm sorry. The global carbon footprint, the logistics, Amazon Web Services uses, and Jeff Bezos is not really a great friend of the unions. So you can't own Amazon in an ESG fund if you're focused on ESG. I mean, you can have your own view on ESG and what's important to you, but you have to take a little bit more ownership and say, this is the most important thing to me. For example, Coca-Cola. Okay, Bill mentioned Coke earlier, and the CEO or the CO or whatever. They make sugar water. type 2 diabetes, obesity, a massive pandemic in our country. Coca-Cola is the leading contributor to that, in my opinion. But they've rated so high in ESG for so long, and they have plastic water bottles, and they take advantage of the destroyed water base, if you will, selling you $2 water, which is zero, right? Cost is zero. So when I look, if I'm saying obesity and diabetes is a terrible problem, and so are plastic bottles, I'm never owning Coca-Cola. I'm just not. Like, they have a diverse board and all these things, and that's great. But environmentally and socially, those are zeros, in my opinion. Just, it's not really equatable. I have kids. They go to the school, and I see in the vending machines all these Coca-Cola products addicting our kids at 5, 7, 10 years old. I'm not owning Coca-Cola if I'm an ESG person. I'm not.
Okay, good. So I think you've said a few really, really interesting points here. So first off, making sure that we're building it as leaders, we're building it into our business strategy. As investors, we're being really honest about what we want to invest in and the activities and what we are seeing in the businesses, and using maybe some of the data that Shandini, I know we'll talk about, to make sure that we're making good decisions. And then also as consumers, being aware of what these companies are doing and maybe making purchasing decisions too.
I think that it can be summed up of saying good versus doing good, and the strong distinction, and being able to stand up and look yourself and say, I'm doing good. I'm not just saying good for the effect of the public face.
Yeah, perfect. And I feel like that's a great segue to talk about data, Michael.
Thank you very much. Now, I have to say to you, Mark, I have got something in common with Warren Buffett. And what I've got in common with Warren Buffett is I really like Coca-Cola. I love that drink. But I realized that it's bad for me. And I realized...
Well, Michael, you can. That's your individual choice. And that's totally fine. And you might say, I want to own Coca-Cola stock. That's good too. But if you can't convince yourself that it's an ESG stock, that's the difference.
I can convince myself I've got a lot in common with Warren Buffett, though, can't I?
There you go. There you go.
Okay, look, I want to have a chat with Shandini. We've got so many questions that come through. So I'm going to talk to Shandini for a few minutes, then we're going to deal with the questions from the audience. I hope you're all okay for time, because we are going to go over time today. But thank you for that, Mark. We'll come back. I think I might ask Bill his opinions about Amazon shortly, and maybe Coca-Cola. But anyway, let me have a brief chat with Shandini now. Shandini, you said that every investor cares about ESG regardless of whether or not they actually support investing based on ESG principles. So why do you think that? And can you also talk about the materiality of ESG risk?
Yeah, I think it just ties back to the question that I was asking Mark earlier. When you're talking about ESG, what exactly are you saying? Are you saying looking at ESG scores of a company, or are you actually talking about using ESG as a risk lens to identify what are good companies and what are bad companies? Now, and I think at the time also I said, nobody ever said, I want to invest in a badly managed company. Nobody ever said, I want to invest in a company that is at risk of lawsuit or fines because they're not paying minimum wage. Nobody said, I want to invest in a company that might have a very high cost of capital to do business because they're in an area that is prone to extreme weather changes. So ESG is basically a risk tool. It is a way to, and it is a framework to investigate what risks there might be to the business, to the way the business is conducted. And as investors, they are basically stewards of capital. Your job as an investor is to ensure maximization of shareholder value, and your job is to make sure there are no downsides to shareholder value. Your job is to make sure there is no permanent loss of capital. So from that perspective, as an investor, given you want to minimize risks to the business that you own, you care about the risks that ESG represents. You care about using that framework to identify there are no risks to doing business. Now, that is a separate debate from saying, do I believe that a company that has a high ESG score is a good company to own? Do I believe that a company that has a high ESG score is actually going to produce good quality returns for me in the future? That is a separate debate. But irrespective of if you believe in that or not, and I think that's where Bill and Mark are having some agreements and some differences. Do you, as investors, all investors will care about first knowing what risks that exist to the business that they own, and then making sure that those risks are hedged. And that's, if you think about ESG as a risk tool, that's basically what it is.
Okay. So do you think that the use of ESG scores actually impacts the debate over ESG negatively? Why do you think ESG scores are flawed?
I think that's what it has come down to, right? Mark, the last thing he said was it's about doing good rather than appearing good. And ESG scores are all about appearing good. One, I think it's a lazy way of understanding a company and if a company is good or bad. Like he gave the example of Amazon. Amazon actually does have a very high Scope 3 carbon footprint, and Amazon is having issues with unionization, and they are actively stopping unionization, right? But Amazon would also have a very high ESG score. So it's one number to sort of talk about so many nuances into a business is by definition a very challenged way of looking at ESG, right? And then when somebody wants to launch what they call an ESG fund and they just rely on a score to say, I have taken the top rated companies and those are the companies that I have put in my fund, and that's why we're a good ESG fund. That's really where the disillusionment with ESG starts. That's where we start to have this debate of, hang on, if you want to say that you're an Article 8 fund and this does good for the world, why do you have these businesses with very high Scope 3 emissions? I can understand the need for scores, at least in the way the world used to be 5 years back. Looking deeply at a business, doing deep analysis and understanding if this business is good or bad for the environment, for the society, is it good or is it well managed, requires looking through a lot of data. And in the absence of both time and skilled resources who can look at that data and make those good judgments, you want a good proxy to say, just like credit scores tell me if this is a good or a bad company for credit, I want some sort of a proxy that tells me if this company is good or bad. The problem is that the scores, one, they're too opaque. You don't know what the methodology has gone in. Two, they mostly look at self-reported data. So a company like Coca-Cola can have a diverse board and write all these great things in their sustainability report and appear great on an ESG score, but the truth on the ground might be quite different, and the scores don't take care of that, what's happening on the ground. And third, they're backward looking. For example, for MSCI, Coke will produce its 2022 sustainability report in June of 23, and they will take another 3 to 6 months to analyze that report. And by the time they give Coca-Cola an ESG score, it's already 12 months backward looking. So because of these three challenges and the way scores are constructed, they're essentially by inherently nature flawed. I have a really funny example actually of, I'm not going to name the provider, but we were looking at the scores that they gave, and they gave Wagner Group at the time, this was 6 months back, a better score than OpenAI. Because their methodology, because if you're not clear about what that score actually talks about, you might end up using the wrong score for the wrong situations. So their methodology was looking at a company's adverse media about the company, and based on that rating the company to say, if a company in recent times had bad media, adverse media, that company would be rated worse than company that had adverse media in the past. But OpenAI's adverse media comes from issues around data privacy and copyright infringement, and all of those are serious issues, I agree. But then Wagner Group has committed genocide in Syria. Yes, that happened 3 years back, but that doesn't make it a better company right now, right? And hopefully that explains my issue with scores. What they were purpose-built for, I think they have outlived their utility. If you use a score without understanding what goes under the hood in the score, then you start to have these debates of, you have these companies that are actually not good for the environment and you're calling them a good ESG company. And then you're also not accounting for companies that are actually improving. Companies that, yes, maybe Shell has very high Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions, but maybe they have a very credible net zero strategy. So they're in the improvers category, and maybe Shell's cost of doing business today is high, but it's going to go down over time. And Shell might actually be a great company and might have great future financial returns. So I think I can go on and on about this, but in the purpose of moving the show forward, I'm going to stop here. But I think why I think scores contribute negatively is probably quite
evident. I think measuring how a company is improving is very important. As long as it's not an oil company that spent a lot of money in the past on trying to persuade people that climate change wasn't real, which for me would be a real no-no. And there is a company that has done that in the past, and yet I think it has quite a good ESG score, so I find that confusing. But anyhow, I think most people know the company I'm talking about. So a big focus on ESG is on carbon and carbon's emissions and the need for net zero, which is obviously important. But you also emphasise the need to focus on the S and the G pillars. in order to make ESG work in the way it was intended, including modern slavery and financial crimes. So are investors missing important issues, do you think?
Yes. And coming back to the first question that you asked me, should investors care about ESG? If we think about ESG as a risk tool, if we think about ESG as a framework, and a framework that shows you where the risks to this business could be, while climate change is important is an important risk, and it is mostly quantitative, there are risks. There are examples of companies just in the last year that have seen a share price decline because because they had poor anti-money laundering controls, or because they were engaging modern slavery. They were engaging in what we could call scope 2 modern slavery, where the company itself appeared green, or the company appeared great, let's say a clothing retail company, but they were actually employing, using suppliers in Southeast Asia, and those suppliers were not paying minimum wage, or they were engaging in wage theft or debt bondage. And all of these are risks to the business. We might all remember the example of Dyson. Dyson uses a company called ATA in Malaysia. That company eventually turned out was treating immigrant workers poorly, and Dyson, obviously, when that news came out, dropped ATA, but Dyson is now being sued by those immigrant workers because Dyson was actually 85% of the revenues of that company. So is Dyson responsible? It is responsible, because Dyson was the one responsible for that company engaging in, was the one providing revenues to that company. So what I'm really trying to say is, when we think about ESG as a risk tool, risk could come from the social pillar and the governance pillar. Again, I understand why it is challenging to look at the social and the governance pillar. I think somebody earlier said that those are a matter of opinion. It's not a matter of opinion, but it is more qualitative at the moment. There are no metrics that go around those, which means you have to actually look through unstructured data. You have to look through text to identify these risks and these issues with the company. And if you're trying to do all of that manually with a limited team, that can become quite challenging. And that's really where we come in. We come in with helping our customers go through that unstructured data as efficiently as possible, as quickly as possible, so they can surface these issues. And then their team is not spending their time on going through that data, but they're spending their time on actually studying those issues and identifying if this is actually material for the business or not. So I think investors should be focusing on social and governance pillars, and investors should be looking towards technology to help them do that better.
Okay, thank you for that, Shandini. So it seems to me that Dyson might have transparent vacuum cleaners, but its transparency wasn't quite so good with governance, perhaps. Okay, we've got so many questions, and I don't think we're going to have enough time to deal with them all in any depth. But I would like to mention them, and I would ask you all, if you have anything to say, just jump in. So Dawn Rennick said the UN's SDGs are quantitative. So the S and G are not just opinion. Just butt in if you have anything to say.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. I think that any material risk factor can be quantitative. We actually use up to 25 of them, which could apply to an industry or a peer group, depending on the nature of the peer group. And every single one of them is quantitative.
So I would just like to add that the UN, as last I checked, was not a financial steward of anything, right? They are a bureaucratic agency telling financial guys like me and Bill how to run a portfolio. This is where I have an issue, because the engineers have left the building and bureaucrats are now telling everybody what the things to focus on for money and risk and reward. And
it's just it's a framework. That's all it is.
But okay, but if I disagree with the UN, I'm on the outside. I am not getting the deals. I am not getting included. I am left out. This guy didn't play well with others. And that's where we've gone from this qualitative assessment of what we think at the UN are the most important things. But do they assess China's coal usage versus the US? No, there's a lot of pay to play. People finance certain things to get certain benefits. And so when we cloud that and don't let the investment management group go for what is the best for their investor base, and they're told by a bureaucracy, focus on this, we run into trouble. Look at the rating on Silicon Valley Bank. There was no governance at all in a bank. They're a medium risk ESG. To me, it's a full-on 100% risk, and it went to zero because people stopped doing due diligence. Oh, these guys like climate, this and that, and they have tons of officers. They're filling blanks and not managing risk because the cloud around.
All right, so I'd like to give
Dora,
I'd like to give Dora an opportunity because I know you wanted to say something there.
Yeah, because I think when you look, when you look at the standards for S&G, they're not really, I mean, they align with the SDGs, but many of them are coming from, the Global Reporting Index, the IFRS. Those standards, those metrics are things that we would look at and say, oh, well, that looks like the responsibilities that HR should manage. That looks like the standards of a CEO to be managing the board. You can actually take a lot of the goals that have been defined by business leaders and industry advisors and say, here are the things that they are saying are material to their business, and look at how they fit into an organizational structure. So they actually don't live outside of the organization. They are a functional component of business strategy in the way I see it.
Okay. Shandini, Bill, anything to add on this point? I'll push on to the next point then. So Morgan Pierce, more of a technical question, I think. What is the difference between this ESG assessment and the B Corp assessment, for example? Shandini, I know you've spoken about B Corps before, at least I think you have. Any thoughts about that?
I think interrelated, but not exactly the same thing. B Corp is a certification that you can go through as a business to prove to sort of certify yourself, saying we engage in responsible and sustainable business practices. It's a long questionnaire, and you have to fill out. It includes things like, do you have a supplier code of conduct? How do you treat your waste? Are you responsible with water and things like that? And being B Corp certified could result in you getting a good ESG score as well. An ESG assessment is something that is done by a third party that looks at how you do business, that looks at any sustainability related documentation that you might produce and other things that might be available about you outside of that to decide what your ESG rating is. So interrelated, but not exactly the same thing.
Okay, thank you for that. We're actually going to be having an episode of the ESG show focusing on B Corps in due course. Siobhan Kenny said, it seems that Mark may have entrenched views about ESG. She says, an interesting debate. Are you calling for a globally recognized ESG measurement tool, and how could this be achieved? So should we have a globally recognized ESG measurement tool? And who would create that? Would that be bureaucrats?
I think the biggest challenge to that idea is the universal nature of goodness, right? Mm-hmm. Various countries, various places believe in self-interest destiny, so to speak, and what they need to pursue. It's very hard to say to Africa, you can't use fossil fuel to help advance, but other countries like China are using coal, and everything else in between. How are we going to be able to implement something on a global basis where everyone's going to say, oh, I comply and here's the proof?
Okay.
Well, to me, this gets back to the issue raised earlier about, what is good ESG? I mean, I would argue that climate risk, some of the other risks that are more S&G related are, these risks are, number one, not going to go away. They're going to accelerate, and no industry is necessarily going to go out of business. It's just that there's going to be winners and losers. And so, I would make the argument, and one could make the argument, that the ESG process, and Siobhan's question Mark, it's not specific to telling a company that they can't burn fossil fuels. It's specific. The question is about measurement of data, which is really what all ESG is. And then I think portfolio managers can basically say, well, yes, this company uses a lot of resources, but they're also in a developing part of the world. Therefore, as I evaluate them, I'm going to evaluate them versus a different set of peers. So I think that the idea of continuing to gather data and then to use data in manners that PMs determine is in the fiduciary interest of their clients is not going to go away. It's going to accelerate, and the data is going to get better because the nature of data is towards transparency.
Okay. Measurement of data. If only we had someone on the panel who is an expert on AI regarding data. Oh, yes, we do, don't we, Shanti? Okay, so Gavin Tweedy, he says, Larry Fink at BlackRock made the point that ESG has been weaponized and instead talks about value creation. We see value creation emerging more in tenders now that require you to demonstrate credible net zero and social value strategies. He says 30% or more of attendance of tender score comes from this. So there's the business justification. So there's the business justification we're talking about. If you want to add a comment, just butt in. Otherwise, I'll just read them.
Can I just wanted to, on the previous point about ESG measurement, and I guess also on this whole point of Larry Fink calling BlackRock, Larry Fink at BlackRock saying that ESG is weaponized. I actually do agree with that. I think ESG as an acronym is weaponized, and I think that is why if we go back into a globally recognized ESG rating tool, we are just furthering the problem. The whole problem comes from the fact that we're using ratings and scores and not doing the analysis that Bill is talking about. If you have data, and if we go away from scoring to we focus more on how do we get companies to disclose more and more data. One, how do we get the companies to gather more and more data? How do we get the companies to put more and more controls and disclose more and more data so that as investors, then you can make an informed judgment. Bill might say, I'm actually happy to own this company in my portfolio because yes, they have very high scope 2 emissions, but they're in Africa and they're doing good for that society. And the fact that the products that they have in the market do good for the society, uplift that society, create jobs is more important than the fact that they have high scope 2 emissions. Mark might be running a different fund and he might be saying, my fund is solely focused on companies that are good for the environment and I'm not going to own this company. But investors need to be doing that sort of analysis themselves to decide what are good companies based on the principles that they have decided for their fund and the principles that their investors, the people giving them capital, have decided. So we do need better data. We need more disclosure from companies and where companies can't disclose, because, for example, the smaller the company gets, Coca-Cola can collect lots of data, but smaller companies will have challenges in collecting that data. You don't want to add more onus on companies and create more operational burden. Then we need technology that can help you find that data. So better data, yes. Better ways of looking at that data, yes. Some sort of globally recognized ESG score, absolutely not.
Okay. Look,
can I just add real quick, Michael?
So
you mentioned Larry Fink. This is the gentleman who said we are forcing behaviors at BlackRock. And when he says the weaponization of ESG, he's the weapons maker, right? Like he's the one who pushed ESG to the forefront in this process. And I also heard Chandini and Bill both talk about risks, and that's what we're really assessing here, risk management. When we talk about ESG, we're talking about higher costs and lower returns overall, because as Chandini mentioned, you need to hire more people. You need to have more compliance, more regulatory. So as we face investors, we have to say, so there's greater costs involved in achieving. When you make a sacrifice to the environment or to ESG, if you will, there's cost to sacrifice. And if that needs to be fully disclosed, to say you're going to get your better E, your better S, your better D, but it's going to cost you. Nothing's free. So that's part of the disclosure that we as investment managers need to say to people, we can achieve those goals. It's going to cost everyone a lot more, though.
Okay. So look, we're 20 minutes over. What I'm going to do, I've got one more question, and I'm just going to ask one of you to give a quick response to that question. Then I thought I'd give you each 30 seconds to sum up your views. If that's okay. So Eric V said, what is your point of view about the ESRS and the fact it will affect about 10,000 companies external to the EU? Does anyone have an answer to Eric's question there? A quick answer.
I think it's great.
You like it?
Yeah.
Okay, it's a thumbs up. So I'm now going to give you each 30 seconds to say your piece. Mark, do you want to kick off first? So 30 seconds. I'm not going to put the stopwatch on, but
Sure.
30 seconds.
As we help steward investors' money and look to protect society and impose the least costs, headwinds on investors to be able to make money and find opportunity, full disclosure, the good and the bad, the warts and all of these investment postures, what you're sacrificing, what you're giving up, what the objectives are, all need to be fully disclosed so that investors can make better decisions and we as a society can benefit in full and not just hear good things and say, oh, I hope that it works out. We need to really hold everyone's feet to the fire and say, are we doing what we said we're doing? And have we achieved goals? And yes, it may cost a little more, but I feel better about it. As long as that's disclosed.
Okay, Mark, you've had your 30 seconds plus. Dora, you're nodding away there. Can you give us 30
I just
seconds?
love this conversation. I think I agree with almost everything that's been said today about needing to be good stewards for everybody in our ecosystem. So to me, that means investors, customers, employees, and the communities in which we operate. And I think this isn't a perfect system, what we have right now, but being able to engage in conversations and talk about where it's working and where it's not is what's going to help us advance the industry forward.
Okay, thanks for that, Dora. Bill, any 30 seconds of wisdom from you?
Yeah, look, I think I understand the anger and frustration over ESG. I also understand its flaws. There's a lot of it that's not authentic, that's, closet indexing, I get that. But there's a reason why people are so riled up about it. And it's because so many people globally, employees, customers, corporate people, other stakeholders, communities, understand what is happening in the world and they want change and they're holding companies and investors accountable for it. And that's all a good thing. It's just, it's a little messy as we go on down this path. That's it.
Okay, thank you for that, Bill. Next week, by the way, we've got Ron DeSantis, David Attenborough, and Aldor on the ESG show. I wish that was true. Shandini, 30 seconds of wisdom from you.
Yeah, I think we're not all as misaligned as we might seem. We're probably all agreeing that ESG is a way to look at risk, and we all want to look at risk in a very holistic way and make sure, as stewards of capital, we mitigate any form of risk. If we identify that ESG is just that and nothing more, and then comes the question about impact. And then comes the question about what do you think are good companies, what are your principles of your fund, and which companies you want to invest in or not. Those are all separate conversations. But as what ESG itself is it gives you certain parameters on which you want to evaluate risk. And I think in the last 5 years, 10 years, we've seen enough examples where companies who are not talking about scores, but on those risk parameters, companies that haven't done well eventually have had high cost of business. They have had significant fines. They have had huge losses. They have had loss of revenue. So I think that is not a debate. That is not even up for debate, that companies who are doing poorly on those ESG risk parameters are going to face a high cost of business, are going to be bad companies to own from a financial standpoint. So I guess in the end, it just comes down to what is the right implementation of identifying those risks. Is it scores? Is it something else? I think, and that's might be something we can talk about later.
Thank you very much, Shandini. I think the time well and truly is up. Don't forget to look up the Inspirational Leaders Network. And thank you all very much for joining us, and see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right.